A few months ago, I was at a coffee shop with a friend. I will call her Diana. And she was telling me about a man she had been on 2 dates with. She was excited. He was charming. He had said all the right things. And as she was talking, her phone buzzed. It was him, canceling their 3rd date. 40 minutes before they were supposed to meet, she apologized for him before I said a word. She said, "He is probably just busy." I said, "How many times has he canceled?" She thought about it. She said, "Just twice before." I did not say anything else about it. I did not need to. She could see it in my face. That moment, Diana apologizing for a man she barely knew before anyone had even suggested he might not deserve it, is what this episode is about. I am 64 years old. I have been watching men behave for a very long time. And what that buys you after enough years is speed. I can sit across from a man in a restaurant or hear a woman describe someone she has been seeing for 3 weeks and know within 5 minutes whether there is a problem. Not always. I am wrong sometimes, but often enough that the women in my life have started calling me before the 3rd date. This is what I have learned to look for. The first thing I watch is how he treats people who can do nothing for him. This is not a new observation. You have probably heard some version of it before. But I want to be specific about what it looks like, because the version most people describe is obvious: the man who is rude to the waiter, who snaps at the cashier. That man exists, but he is easy to spot. The men I am talking about are more subtle than that. What I watch for is the small dismissal, the way a man fails to acknowledge someone who is serving him. Not rudeness, just nothing. No eye contact, no thank you. The server brings the food and he keeps talking without breaking stride, as if the food materialized on its own. That absence of acknowledgement tells me something very specific about how he moves through the world. He has divided people into those who matter and those who do not. And the woman across the table from him has not yet found out which category she will end up in. I was at dinner once with a man who was witty and attentive the entire evening. He had my full attention. But 3 times during the meal, I watched him not look at the woman who brought our food. Not once. And I thought, there it is. I went home and I did not see him again, and I do not regret it. The second thing I watch is the ratio of asking to telling. A man who is genuinely interested in you asks questions. Not interview questions, real questions. Questions that follow from what you just said. Questions that show he was listening. Questions that make you feel like the room got smaller and you are the only person in it. A man who is performing interest asks one question and then uses your answer as a bridge back to himself. You say, "I have been thinking about taking a trip to Portugal." He says, "Oh, I went to Portugal," and then you hear about Portugal for 8 minutes. The ratio matters, not because men should never talk about themselves, but because in the early weeks of getting to know someone, the balance reveals something. A man who is mostly talking is a man who is mostly interested in how he is being received. He wants to impress you. He wants you to find him interesting. That is a different thing from actually finding you interesting. After enough years, I can feel the difference in about 10 minutes. When I am genuinely being listened to, I know it. And when I am being used as an audience, I know that too. Diana told me when I asked her later that she had done most of the listening on their first 2 dates. She had found him fascinating. I asked her, "What do you think he knows about you?" She thought about it for a long time. She said, "Probably not much." The third thing I watch is how he handles being told no. This one is harder to observe on a first date because no usually does not come up. But there are small versions of it everywhere if you are paying attention. What happens when you say you do not like a restaurant, he suggested? What happens when you are not available on the day he proposed? What happens when you express a preference that is different from his? A man who handles no gracefully, who says, fine, no problem, what works for you, is telling you something. He has a settled sense of himself that does not depend on winning every small exchange. He can be inconvenienced without becoming difficult. A man who handles no poorly gives it away in the adjustment. A flicker of irritation, a slight shift in warmth. He agrees, of course, no problem, but something in his tone has changed. And if you are paying attention, you notice it. The women I know who have ended up in difficult relationships almost always describe something like this in the early weeks. A small correction in temperature. A moment when he was less pleasant than he had been, briefly, because something had not gone his way. That moment is not the whole story, but it is a data point, and data points accumulate. The fourth thing I watch is what he does with your time. Lateness is easy if a man is consistently late. That is information about how he values your time. But what I pay more attention to is cancellations, last-minute changes, and the way he responds when his schedule changes versus when yours does. A man who cancels and expects it to be absorbed without much comment, who assumes you will be understanding, who does not offer to reschedule immediately, who makes the inconvenience yours to manage, is showing you something about the architecture of the relationship he wants to build. In that relationship, his time will matter more than yours. He does not know he is showing you this, but he is. Diana's man had canceled 3 times in 3 weeks, and each time she had said, no problem, I understand. She had made it easy for him to do it again, and she had been apologizing for him before anyone even asked. I told her, the cancellations are not the problem. The problem is that he has learned you will absorb them, and a man who knows you will absorb the inconvenience will keep being inconvenient. The fifth thing I watch is whether he can hold a disagreement without it becoming something. Early in getting to know someone, you are mostly agreeable. You are both on your best behavior. You are finding the things you have in common and setting aside the things you do not. That is normal. But somewhere in the first month, if you are paying attention, a genuine disagreement will surface. Something where you actually see things differently. What happens in that moment tells me more than almost anything else. A man who can disagree with you and stay warm, who can say, I see it differently, and still be easy to be with, that man has something important. He has enough security in himself that he does not need you to agree with him in order to feel okay. He can hold the disagreement without needing to resolve it in his favor. A man who cannot do this becomes, in those moments, subtly different. He might get quieter. He might push the point past where it needs to be pushed. He might respond to your different opinion as though it were a challenge to him personally. He might make a joke that lands just slightly wrong, a joke with an edge in it, aimed at your position. These are all versions of the same thing. A man who needs to win, or who needs you to come around, or who finds your distinctness uncomfortable. Women who have spent years with men like this describe a slow, specific disappearance. They stop saying the thing they actually think. They learn which topics to avoid. They shape their opinions around what he can comfortably hear. And they often do not notice they have done this until they are outside the relationship and find themselves startled by the sound of their own voice having a strong opinion. There is a sixth thing I watch, and it is less about behavior and more about feeling. I pay attention to how I feel in the gaps between seeing him when a relationship is right. When someone is genuinely good for you, the gaps are easy. You look forward to seeing him, yes. But you are also fine in between. You can think about other things. You can be fully present in your own life without monitoring the silence, without wondering why he has not texted, without constructing explanations for small things that should not require explanation. When something is off, the gaps are anxious. You find yourself checking your phone more than usual. You catch yourself replaying things he said, looking for evidence that it is all fine. You work harder than you should have to in order to feel okay about where things stand. And if someone asks you how it is going, you find yourself saying, "Good, I think," and then pausing on the I think. The I think is the thing. Certainty feels different from this. Real ease feels different from this. And at 64, I have been in both kinds of relationship enough times to know the difference in the first 2 weeks. The anxious checking, the quiet monitoring, the work of reassuring yourself that is not chemistry, that is your nervous system telling you that something requires more attention than it is getting. I want to say something about why these things are easy to miss when you are younger and why they become visible with time. When you are younger and you meet someone who is exciting, the excitement itself is information. The way he makes you feel, the electricity, the looking forward to, the way the hours disappear, that feeling crowds out the other observations. The small dismissal of the waiter gets absorbed into the warmth he has shown you. The slight shift in temperature when you said no gets rationalized as him having a bad day. The cancellations get explained by how busy he is. The chemistry is real, and it is loud, and it makes the quieter signals hard to hear. What changes with age is not that the excitement disappears. It is that you have seen enough outcomes to know that the exciting man who cannot acknowledge the waiter and the difficult man you are trying to leave 5 years later are often the same man. The connection between the early signals and the later reality becomes visible in a way it was not when you had not yet seen enough of those outcomes. I am not saying this to make younger women feel foolish. I am saying it because I miss these things too, for a long time, in exactly the ways I have just described. What I have now is not better instincts, it is a longer memory. I also want to say something about what good looks like, because I think sometimes these conversations become so focused on the warning signs that we forget to describe the thing we are looking for instead. Good in the early weeks is quiet. It does not announce itself. It does not arrive with intensity and urgency and the feeling that you have never met anyone like this before. In my experience, that particular kind of intensity is more often a sign of someone who needs something from you than someone who simply wants to know you. Good looks like ease. It looks like a man who is genuinely glad to hear from you and also has a full life that he is getting on with. It looks like plans that are made and kept. It looks like disagreements that come and go without leaving a residue. It looks like being able to be quiet together without it feeling like something needs to be filled. It looks like a man who, when you say you are tired and would rather stay in, says, "Fine, let us do that," and means it. It is not dramatic. It does not make a very good story in the early weeks. But at 64, I would take easy over exciting every single time, because I have seen where exciting goes and I have seen where easy goes. And easy, it turns out, builds into something you can actually live in. I want to tell you what happened with Diana. She did not go on the third date. Not because I told her not to, I did not. But we talked for a long time that afternoon, and by the end of it, she could see what she had been doing. She had been working very hard to be understanding about a man she had known for 3 weeks. She had been making his convenience her project. She had been apologizing for him before anyone had suggested he needed defending. She said, "I think I knew. I just did not want to know." That is the thing I come back to most often in these conversations. Not that the signs were hidden, not that the women around me lacked intelligence or experience, but that there is a specific kind of knowing that we talk ourselves out of quickly, quietly, efficiently, because acting on it feels more expensive than explaining it away. What I want to say to Diana and to anyone who is in the middle of that process right now is this. Your instincts are already telling you something. They have probably been telling you something for a while. You do not need to be 64 years old to hear them. You just need to decide to take them seriously. At 64, what I can do is tell you, I have seen enough of this to know that the quiet thing you are talking yourself out of is usually the thing you should be acting on. It does not always mean leaving. It does not always mean something is terribly wrong. But it means paying attention, watching the ratio, noticing the temperature, taking the cancellations seriously. Your knowing is data. Use it. My name is Patricia Hayes. This is Patricia's Porch, where I believe the most honest conversations are the most useful ones. If this reached someone who needed to hear it, please share it with her. And subscribe below, because I am here every week and I would love to keep this conversation going with you. Thank you for sitting with me. I will see you next time.